This is ASUS ARES CrossFire. If you wanted the most extravagant, the most exotic GPU setup 12 years ago, then this is what you got. We have 4 GPUs, together over 9 pounds in weight, and in today's money around $4,500. But after all those years, what is left of this glory? Well, today we're going to find out. I still can't quite believe I actually managed to find 2 of these cards. If the figures are correct, only 1,000 of these were made, and who knows how many of them are left. And if you've been following this channel for a while, you know that I already did a video on one of these cards a while back. But back then I never would have expected to find another one of these. In total I paid $175 for both as well, so that's really cheap. But to quickly recap what made these cards so special. And for that we need to go back to 2010, which was a different era for GPUs. Nvidia had their hot off the press Fermi line with at the top the GTX 480, and AMD had their HD 5000 Terascale line with at the top the dual GPU 5970. And the 5970 was a pretty monstrous card already, but it did have reduced clock speeds for both the core and memory compared to the 5870 to keep power and heat somewhat under control. And this is where ASUS could see some room for improvement. Named after the figure from Greek mythology, Ares, they created these monstrous cards with first some cherry-picked 5870 chips and then this complete custom design, which allowed them to run these 5870 chips at the full 850 MHz core clock and 1200 MHz on the memory. And not only that, but they doubled the memory to 2 GB per chip for a total of 4 GB per card, which was really a monstrous amount in 2010. And for the design and cooling of these cards, they just went absolutely nuts. This is probably one of the most best built cards I've ever seen, because everything is made out of metal. And ASUS's David Young commented that he was adamant that despite the additional weight, metal just feels better, and it really does. We have a metal backplate, we have a metal shroud, we have full copper coolers, and together 2 of these cards weigh 9.4 pounds, which is just insane. Here I've taken the shrouds off because these coolers just have to be seen. It's insane how heavy these cards are. But copper, while really expensive, works really well, and they've really gone to town. Not only do we have copper heat pipes, but the entire fin assemblies themselves, including that of the VRM, are pure copper. With David Young commenting that these cards were tested to withstand 96 hours of Furmark and an ambient temperature of 55 degrees centigrade. So yeah, no expenses were spared when designing these. And from what I can tell, this will be the first benchmark of these cards since the launch reviews back in 2010. So let's get everything together and start them up. And this has by far been one of the most frustrating systems I've ever tested. For a start, you have to go back to Windows 7 in order to get the proper performance from the drivers, and for that we are using an X99 Extreme 6 with a 6-core 5820K. But Windows 7 is not necessarily the issue, it's the atrocious stability of the Terascale CrossFire drivers. For reference, at the start I used a 1TB SSD with around 50 to 100 power on cycles. But because of this, and this, and this, and especially this, we're now up to 450 power on cycles, literally hundreds of times of crashes and rebooting in order to get everything to work and to get some accurate result. It's beyond frustrating. But we are running Crysis 2 here. By the way, you really have to cherry pick your titles in order to get the game compatibility and utilization right, so Crysis 2 is really the best case result. But we are running at 1080p max settings, getting up to 120 FPS, which with 99% utilization on all 4 GPUs. And it is really running buttery smooth with actually quite excellent frame times as well. I was really surprised by this. But for that we are using a whopping 770 to 790 watts of power. And that also stands out with this setup, is just how loud and how much heat it produces. It's really a compact furnace. Although the coolers are doing quite an excellent job keeping everything below 80 degrees centigrade, but the amount of noise they produce is really a lot. However, in relation to modern GPUs, 780 watts seems rather docile for 4 GPUs. So while we are getting excellent performance and utilization on all 4 GPUs, will it be enough to come close to a modern GTX 1080? Well, let's find out. Starting with Tomb Raider, which is known to like older AMD hardware, and here the Ares CrossFire did well, scoring 169 FPS average, beating out the Quad HD6 870s and a 3GB GTX 1060. It was, however, a little behind the GTX 1080, which was 50% faster at 267 FPS. Moving on to the first synthetic test, 3D Mark Skydiver, and here the results weren't as good as in Tomb Raider. While scaling was excellent from 1 Ares to 2 Ares, here it lost to the 1060 with 37,184 points, and the 1080 was absolutely screaming ahead here with over 75,000 points. But then we have Crysis 2 at 1080p on the Ultra settings, and here we've got the best result for the dual Ares yet. It really all came together, with a 120 FPS average with near perfect scaling from 1 to 2 cards. And here it scored a whopping 74% of the performance of the GTX 1080, a card 6 years newer than the Ares. Real impressive performance. Next up, the second synthetic test, Unigine Heaven, and here the results are pretty similar to what we saw in 3D Mark Skydiver. The Ares CrossFire averaged 131 FPS, but here the 1080 was just too good, averaging 217 FPS, or about 70% faster. We see similar performance in Battlefield 4, with the Ares CrossFire averaging 99 FPS average. A good uplift over the single card, but it's not enough to get close to the 1080 here. Nevertheless, it was very playable at 1080p Ultra settings. And as this is a fully buffered video, we end with Grand Theft Auto 4, which I managed to force to run in quad crossfire mode. It really didn't like it though, with poor utilization and performance all over the place, but overall it was fun to see this game running in quad crossfire. So there we go, a fresh look at ASUS Ares CrossFire 12 years after they were first launched. And overall it's been a mighty task to get this all together, to source the cards, to get them tested, but I do think the results are there. In the best case we saw 74% of the performance of a GTX 1080 in Crysis 2, which I do think is quite impressive. But there have also been some things I haven't been able to do. First being overclocking, as with my review of the single card, I got it up to 1 GHz on the core clock, but the stability of the drivers was so bad that overclocking just wasn't possible. Secondly, I've been meaning to test the compute capabilities, but here the Terascale drivers also hold it back. There's just no driver compatibility for compute applications. However, that doesn't take away from the fact that this setup is just so awesome and it's been super fun to play around with. And I hope you have enjoyed it as well, and at this point I also turn to you. If you have any experience with Crossfire setups, do leave them in the comments below. And if you have enjoyed this video, why not subscribe to the Fully Buffered channel? In any case, that was all for now, and bye bye.